Let's bring Brian McTaggart in, who was there yesterday for the press conference. Brian, good morning. Talk about the event yesterday. What was the feel like, and did everybody leave there smiling as we suspect happened?
Yeah, Dusty really, won over the room. I mean, he was Dusty Baker. He was very friendly. He answered the questions, the way you expect him to. He name dropped people. He talked about Bill Walsh, Bill Russell. He mentioned the Rolling Stones and listening to Muddy Waters and B.B. King and even Too Short, who's a rapper that I had to look up. I had no idea who he was. But he said all the right things, and I think he won over the room. And, there's been a lot of pretty solemn press conferences at Minute Maid Park over the last few months. And, for once, there was one where people left, I think, with a good taste in their mouth and believing that, for a team that needs to restore some respectability, that the right man for the job is Dusty Baker. I mean, he's a guy that you've never heard anyone say a bad thing about, anyone that knows him. And that's what they need right now, someone to come in that's going to garner respect right away. But, yeah, he had the room. And now the tough part comes because he's got to get to learn these players, and then he's got to get to spring training, and then he's going to answer more and more questions about sign stealing and where the club goes from here. But based on what we saw yesterday, it looks like he's more than equipped to handle all that.
Yeah, no, I think also the big thing with Dusty is he was a really good ball player.
Yeah.
And, so to be able to know that you're going to go 0 for 15, it's going to happen. He's going to be able to talk, guys, here's how you're going to answer those questions, because the first question is, oh, you're not getting the signs anymore? You can't hit? And you're going to have to be able to answer that directly. And Dusty's going to be that perfect guy to kind of navigate that.
Brian, you've written about a few things that I guess are top-of-mind questions for Dusty Baker, for the Astros, as far as what's next. I mean, one of the things that Dusty's been criticized for, I think, inaccurately and unfairly later on in his managerial career, is a lack of willingness, I guess, to embrace analytics. Was he asked about that yesterday at the press conference?
Yeah, he was. He sort of said, look, a lot of this stuff was going on when I was managing. We just didn't call it analytics. I was keeping my own notes about different things that nobody was talking about in the mainstream back in the day. Now, look, things in the last 5 or 10 years have gone to different levels, and the Astros, and we all know, are at the forefront of that. But it's not like Dusty's going to come in and he's going to find this stack of materials on his desk. He's going to push them away. No, he's going to sit down. He's going to look at it. He's got a coaching staff led by Joe Espada, the bench coach, who was on board with this last year. So he knows the routine and what the Astros do as far as analytics. And it's still going to remain a huge part of what they do. I mean, the front office is still very analytically driven, and Dusty met with them some too during the interview process. So, he's going to have to probably consume more of that than he ever has in his career. But he's 70 years old. This is his last hurrah, and he wants to win a World Series. He knows this is his last shot, and so I think he's going to do whatever it takes. But, yeah, to say Dusty, he was a manager who started way before the analytics came along. But, he's slowly adapted, and he's still adapting. And I think he will adapt even more now he's with the Astros, who are one of the most forward-thinking organizations in the game.
You mentioned Joe Espada, and we get word that Joe is being retained on the coaching staff. He's got one of the best pitching coaches in the game in Brent Strom, who isn't going anywhere. But we all think that he's going to get at least one of his guys. Chris Spire's name's been floated. Is there anything out there locally as to what the coaching staff is going to look like under Dusty?
Yeah, I know that he wanted Chris Spire to come aboard, but Jim Crane was very committed to Joe Espada because, Joe's a guy who interviewed for a couple of managerial jobs in the offseason. He was a finalist for the Giants, a finalist for the Cubs. He's considered one of the next up-and-coming managerial candidates in the game. So they wanted to keep him on staff. They wanted to keep him as bench coach. So when asked yesterday, it seems to appear that the entire coaching staff is coming back intact. They do have some changes. Don Kelly's already left. They have a new first base coach. So I'm not sure if there'll be room for Chris Spire or not, but I know he and Dusty are really close, and maybe he will be involved in some capacity. But, I think keeping Joe Espada as the bench coach was a good step forward. Remember, Dusty's on a one-year deal. We don't know where it will be in a year from now. So if he decides that, he wants to pull the plug in a year and step down, and then you have Joe Espada as the bench coach, a guy who's clearly capable of taking over a team at that point.
So I'm curious, you've been following all this stuff for so long. What do you think is the biggest challenge of this year's Astro team?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is going to be outside the field, outside the clubhouse, just when they go on the road. And we've seen the story how Dodger fans are going to come to Angel Stadium and harass the Astros. I think going from town to town, they're going to hear signs. They're going to hear taunts from the fans. And clearly some players have spoken out, too, who are upset about what the Astros did. So I don't know if there's going to be any retaliation at that point. But I just think the aura around the team, Dusty's going to have to just keep them very focused on the task at hand. This is still a team that could win the World Series. I mean, they were 8 outs away last year. Yeah, they did lose Garrett Cole, but still a very talented team that could make another run at this. So they have a lot on the line to play for. And Dusty's going to have to convince them to block out the noise, block out the fans, and all the distractions that are going to come around. It's going to be a little bit of a circus, I think, as they go from town to town, because Astros are the villains of Major League Baseball right now, right or wrong. And Dusty Baker's been brought in to sort of calm the waters and manage that a little bit. I think that's going to be his number one goal going forward. And we're not really going to know what that entails, I think, until they start going on the road and playing when the regular season starts.
Hey, Brian, quickly before we let you go, is there anything new on the search for a general manager? Still a vacancy there?
Yeah, Jim Crane seemed to indicate yesterday that they're really in no rush. I mean, they felt they needed to get a manager in place before spring training. I mean, we're 2 weeks away, and that makes a lot of sense. But there's all the heavy lifting in the offseason is pretty much done right now. So I think this will take us now into spring training, maybe the middle of March. They'll probably interview some candidates, maybe down in West Palm Beach. But, some names have come out. They've probably interviewed more names than we know about. But I think it's just like the manager search. I think it'll be very thorough. And Crane even floated the possibility of we might stay put. We might not do anything. He really likes the front office, the depth of the front office, and what they have in the analytic department. Right now, Pete Putila is sort of running the front office, the assistant GM. So you remember they not only lost Luno, they lost Brandon Taubman last year, so the top 2 guys in the baseball ops department. But they're not in any rush. They don't feel they need to be. They want to get the right guy for the job, just like they felt they did with Dusty Baker and the manager.
All right, Brian, we appreciate it. Brian McTaggart joining us talking Astros here. So much to get into with them as Dusty Baker's in place, and the search continues for a GM. Brian, we appreciate the conversation. Have a good weekend.